Welcome to Crimes Beyond Borders, where we'll bring you the most thrilling true crime stories every single day. If you're fascinated by mystery, intrigue, and the darker side of human nature, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us as we unravel the most shocking and perplexing criminal cases from around the world. The story is about to begin after this intro.
From city streets to far-off lands, mystery slipping through our hands. Crimes beyond borders they speak, voices strong but words are meek. Every story leaves a mark, whispers softly in the dark.
Our stories at first are made for ourselves, to comfort us, to help us sleep, and to learn. Along the way, they become a part of our journey, teaching us English and fueling our passion for true crime. So, listen carefully, and if you're about to sleep, close your eyes. Let's begin. The Flor Contemplacion case, a tale of justice, injustice, and the exploitation of migrant workers. In the early 1990s, an ordinary woman from the Philippines named Flor Contemplacion became an unexpected symbol of injustice, national pride, and the struggles faced by overseas Filipino workers, OFWs, worldwide. Her story is not just one of a single crime or a single life lost, but rather a reflection of a broken system. A system that sent millions of Filipinos abroad in search of better opportunities, only for many of them to encounter exploitation, abuse, and in Flor's case, a controversial death sentence. Flor's execution in Singapore in 1995 sparked outrage and despair across the Philippines, bringing to light the plight of OFWs, the inadequate protection provided by their own government, and the complexities of justice in foreign lands. But was Flor truly guilty of the crime she was accused of? Or was she a scapegoat caught in the machinations of a corrupt and indifferent system? This is her story. Background: Flor Contemplacion and the OFW experience. Flor Ramos Contemplacion was born on January 7, 1953, in the province of Laguna, Philippines. She grew up in poverty, like many Filipinos from rural areas, where opportunities for education and employment were scarce. Flor was an unassuming, simple woman, but she had dreams of providing a better life for her family. Married to a friend Contemplacion, she had 4 children and struggled to make ends meet in a country that had long been plagued by economic difficulties, corruption, and political instability. In the early 1990s, like so many others before her, Flor decided to become an overseas Filipino worker, OFW, leaving her family behind in search of better financial prospects. She secured a job as a domestic worker in Singapore, where she would send money back home to support her husband and children. The decision to work abroad is never easy for OFWs, who sacrifice their own happiness and endure long separations from loved ones in hopes of building a better future. For Flor, this separation would turn out to be permanent. The crime: the deaths of Delia Maga and Nicholas Huang. In 1991, Flor Contemplacion's life took a dark and irreversible turn. She was accused of the brutal murder of a fellow Filipina domestic worker named Delia Maga and Delia's 4-year-old charge, a Singaporean boy named Nicholas Huang. The events surrounding the murders remain unclear and deeply contested, but the basic facts of the case are as follows. On May 4, 1991, Delia Maga was found strangled to death in her employer's house in Singapore, and Nicholas Huang, the young boy she was caring for, was found drowned in a bathtub. Initial investigations pointed to Flor Contemplacion, who had been a close friend of Delia. Flor was arrested on suspicion of murder. According to the prosecution, Flor had strangled Delia in a fit of rage during an argument. The details of what the argument was about remain unclear, but the Singaporean authorities suggested that jealousy or personal issues were involved. Nicholas, the young boy, was said to have been an unfortunate witness to the crime, and Flor allegedly drowned him to cover her tracks. Flor denied the charges. She insisted on her innocence, claiming that she had no reason to kill Delia, who had been her friend, and certainly no reason to harm the young boy. Nevertheless, the case proceeded quickly through the Singaporean courts, with Flor ultimately being found guilty of both murders. In January 1993, she was sentenced to death by hanging. A questionable investigation and confession. From the very beginning, there were troubling aspects to the investigation and trial. Flor's defense team argued that she had been coerced into confessing to the murders. They claimed that she had been subjected to intense psychological pressure and possibly even torture during her interrogation. Flor herself later recanted her confession, stating that she had been forced to admit to the crime after days of relentless questioning and without proper legal representation. Moreover, several inconsistencies in the evidence began to emerge. For instance, there was no physical evidence directly linking Flor to the crime scene. There were no fingerprints, DNA, or eyewitness accounts placing her at the scene at the time of the murders. The prosecution's case rested largely on the coerced confession and circumstantial evidence, which many felt was insufficient for a conviction, let alone a death sentence. Additionally, rumors began to circulate that another individual might have been responsible for the murders. It was suggested that Nicholas Huang's father, an influential and well-connected businessman, might have had a role in the crime. Some speculated that he had accidentally killed his son in a fit of rage, and that Dahlia had been killed to cover up the incident. Flor, they argued, was simply a convenient scapegoat, an expendable migrant worker whose life could be sacrificed to protect more powerful interests. These doubts and speculations did not sway the Singaporean authorities, however. The Singaporean justice system is known for its strict and uncompromising stance on crime, especially violent crime. The courts rejected Flor's appeal, and the death sentence was upheld. Diplomatic fallout. The Philippines' reaction. As Flor's execution date approached, the case began to draw international attention, particularly in the Philippines, where the media portrayed Flor as a victim of injustice. The Filipino people, who had long endured the hardships of sending their loved ones abroad to work, saw in Flor's case the exploitation and abuse that so many OFWs faced in foreign lands. Protests erupted across the Philippines, with many demanding that the government intervene to save Flor's life. The Philippine government, led by then-President Fidel Ramos, found itself caught in a delicate diplomatic situation. On the one hand, they needed to maintain good relations with Singapore, a powerful neighbor and key economic partner. On the other hand, the public outrage in the Philippines was impossible to ignore. President Ramos made several personal appeals to Singaporean authorities requesting clemency for Flor. The Philippine government also sought assistance from international human rights organizations, arguing that Flor's trial had been flawed and that her confession had been coerced. Despite these efforts, Singapore remained steadfast in its decision. The Singaporean government argued that its judicial process had been fair and transparent, and it refused to entertain calls for clemency. They viewed the case as an internal matter and resisted any attempts to influence their legal system. The execution. March 17, 1995. On March 17, 1995, despite the protests, the appeals, and the growing international pressure, Flor Contemplacion was executed by hanging in Singapore's Changi prison. Her death sent shockwaves throughout the Philippines. For many Filipinos, her execution felt like a national tragedy, a symbol of the vulnerability of their migrant workers and the perceived indifference of their own government to the plight of OFWs. In the days following her execution, mass demonstrations were held across the Philippines. Protesters burned effigies of Singaporean officials, and there were calls to sever diplomatic ties with Singapore altogether. The Philippine government temporarily recalled its ambassador from Singapore, and relations between the two countries became strained. Flor's execution also ignited a fierce debate about the treatment of OFWs. Many argued that the Philippine government had failed to provide adequate legal support for Flor during her trial, and that they had not done enough to protect her rights. Others pointed out that Flor's case was just one of many examples of OFWs who were mistreated or abandoned by their employers and by the very institutions that were supposed to protect them. The aftermath, legacy, and controversy. Flor Contemplation's execution marked a turning point in the Philippines. The case spurred the creation of new policies aimed at protecting OFWs and providing better legal and diplomatic support for Filipinos working abroad. The Philippine government established additional safeguards to ensure that Filipino workers in foreign countries had access to legal representation and were not subjected to unfair treatment. However, even as these changes were implemented, questions about Flor's guilt continued to haunt the public. Over the years, several human rights organizations and independent investigators have revisited the case, pointing to the inconsistencies in the evidence and the possible involvement of other parties in the murders. Flor's family has maintained her innocence, and many Filipinos still believe that she was wrongly convicted and executed. The case also highlighted the deep socioeconomic problems that led so many Filipinos, like Flor, to seek work abroad. The lack of employment opportunities and the pervasive poverty in the Philippines forced millions of people to leave their families behind and take on grueling, often dangerous jobs in foreign lands. Flor's story became a reminder of the sacrifices these workers made, as well as the risks they faced. For Singapore, the case was a demonstration of its strict adherence to the rule of law, regardless of public or diplomatic pressure. The Singaporean government has stood by its handling of the case, insisting that Flor received a fair trial and that justice was served. But for many Filipinos, Flor Contemplacion remains a martyr, an innocent woman caught in the crossfire of international politics and economic inequality. Conclusion: a symbol of struggle. The story of Flor Contemplacion is more than just a tale of crime and punishment. It is the story of millions of migrant workers who leave their homes in search of a better life, only to face hardship, abuse, and in some cases, death. Flor's case exposed the vulnerabilities of these workers and the need for greater protections and support from their home countries. Her execution remains a painful memory for the Philippines, a reminder of a time when a single life was caught in the balance of international relations, economic desperation, and a flawed justice system. To this day, Flor Contemplacion's story continues to resonate with those who seek justice for the marginalized and oppressed, and her legacy endures as a symbol of the ongoing struggle for migrant workers' rights around the world. The story has come to an end, but stay relaxed. If you feel yourself drifting off to sleep, just let the video play and enjoy the soothing music in the background. Let it guide you gently into rest. We'll be here, bringing you more stories every night. Sleep well, and see you tomorrow at 8 p.m.